I would like to thank the family advocacy movement, and in particular the indefatigable Melanie Williams-Smotherman, for inviting me here today. I have followed the progress of many grassroots advocacy organizations over the past 30 years, and I cannot think of another that has come so far, so fast. A year ago, Todd Landry said that if the legislature simply imposed a tough age limit on safe haven, quote, all these other questions will disappear. Well, today, you have reaffirmed what you have made clear all year. You're not about to disappear, and the people in power had better get used to it. I am honored to be a part of this event. I am very fortunate in that almost all of what I write, from my book to a presentation like this one, is critiqued and edited by a brilliant journalist who is now Washington representative for the Scientific Integrity Program of the Union of Concerned Scientists. That would be my wife, Celia Wexler. She has endured hearing more of these presentations in our living room than anyone should have to. One of the most important things she's told me is, you have to tell them why you're so angry. Now, some in this audience will need no explanation. But to explain to others why I am so angry, I need to tell you about the unusual route that led me here. For most of my professional life, I was either a journalist or a professor of journalism. I covered my first child welfare story in 1976 when I was still a journalism student. I interviewed a woman who was at the time 21. By the time she was 9 years old, she had been in 9 different foster homes. She told me that she survived by keeping the rage bottled up inside her, unlike her 5 brothers, as she put it, who've been in every jail in New York State. And this is some of what she said. When you spend your life going from place to place and knowing you're not going to be in any place for very long, you learn not to reach out, not to care, not to feel. My bitterness, she said, is not that I went through what I did. My bitterness is that I don't think it should have had to happen. There was no reason my family's life should have been destroyed. After speaking to this woman for 2.5 hours, I reached a couple of conclusions. First, I was very glad I chose journalism as a career. Second, I knew I would keep coming back to the story. And as I did keep coming back to the story, I kept finding that the facts on the ground were not matching what the most widely quoted so-called experts were saying. When that dichotomy became too much to bear, I wrote a book on the topic, Wounded Innocence. Ultimately, that led me into my new career. As I said, that interview with a former foster child was in 1976. 16 years later, I was working in that same city, and I took part in a panel discussion on foster care. Also on the panel was a representative of one of those big, respected private agencies with blue-chip boards of directors that lives on per diem reimbursements for keeping children in foster care. He was going on about how supposedly children are removed only as a last resort and never for even a day longer than necessary. But he said, maybe after another generation, we'll consider changing the financial incentives under which we operate. After another generation. Nothing that had happened to that young woman, that former foster child, and all who came after really mattered to him at all. Why am I so angry? Because now it's been just about another generation, and if anything, it is even more likely that children will suffer as that former foster child did. Consider a case that was the topic not of a 5-part series or even a front-page story, but at least got squeezed into the Omaha World Herald some years ago. It's the story of a 4th grader named Sierra Moten. Sierra's mother did not beat her. She did not sexually assault her. She did not starve her or lock her in a closet. On the contrary, as a story in the World Herald explained, Sierra's mom clearly cares about her children. She keeps Sierra's drawings under her mattress and will tell you proudly that Sierra taught herself how to swim when she was just 2. She's going to be something, Michelle Moten says about her daughter. I know she is. But that wasn't enough for child protective workers. 2 years before that story was written, Sierra and her siblings were thrown into foster care solely because her mother couldn't keep the house clean enough. The children were subsequently returned, but Ms. Moten still was having trouble with cleaning, which means the children could have been taken again at any time. Sending in someone to help with the cleaning would have been far more humane than foster care. It would have cost less, and it would have kept one more foster home available for a child in real danger. But rather than help a, quote, bad mother, the state of Nebraska took away Michelle Moten's children. These things do not happen because workers are jackbooted thugs who relish tearing children from their parents. Mostly they're well-meaning people, underprepared, undertrained, and terribly overwhelmed, who then are sent out to make life and death decisions. What these cases have in common is the single biggest problem in child welfare systems. For those affected, the problem is no more serious than the destruction of lives when children are needlessly taken because of mental health problems. But this problem happens far more often simply because the target population is so much larger. The problem is the confusion of child poverty with child neglect. Cases like the case of Sierra Moten also are far more common than the horror stories of beatings, rape, torture, and murder that regularly and rightly make headlines. Why is poverty confused with neglect? In part, it's because the poor are defined into our neglect laws. A Nebraska Health and Human Service System annual report on child abuse defined neglect as, quote, the failure of the parent to provide for the basic needs or provide a safe or sanitary living environment for the child. That's a great definition of poverty. Other cases fall between the extremes. The parent's neither all victim nor all villain. Some of those in-between cases involve drug abuse, and that raises another question. Why even bother with parents, usually mothers in those cases? But the reason to bother is not for the sake of the parents, but for their children. University of Florida Medical Center researchers studied two groups of infants born with cocaine in their systems. One group was placed in foster care, the other with birth mothers able to care for them. After 6 months, the actual physical development of the infants was better when they were left in their own homes. For the foster children, being taken from their mothers was more toxic than the cocaine. It is extremely difficult to take a swing at, quote, bad mothers without the blow landing on their children. If we really believe all the rhetoric about putting the needs of children first, then we have to put those needs ahead of everything, including how we may feel about their parents. Now, that doesn't mean we can simply leave children with addicts. It does mean that drug treatment for the parent almost always is a better first choice than foster care for the child. And addiction to meth is just as treatable in the same time frames as any other addiction. Despite the breathtakingly broad definitions of neglect, the people who run CPS agencies always say, foster care is a last resort. We only take away children when absolutely necessary. But if that were so, then similar places should have similar rates of child removal. They don't. My organization has created a rate of removal index in which we compare the number of children removed from their homes over the course of a year to the total child population, but also, more importantly, to the number of poor children in each state. That way, states can't use the excuse, well, we take away more children because we have more child poverty. We also measure the proportion of children in foster care on any given day, again, compared both to the total child population and the impoverished child population. 4 measures in all. Only one state manages to be among the 3 worst states in every single one of those measures. Care to guess? Yeah, Nebraska. When one looks at the most reliable measure, entries into care compared to impoverished child population, the rate of child removal in Nebraska is nearly triple the national average. The rate of removal in Nebraska is nearly 4 times the rate in Alabama, widely considered a national model for keeping children safe. There is no one who knows more about how much injustice to families continues to endure in Illinois than Diane Redleaf. As you listen to her comments, multiply by 6, because the rate of child removal in Nebraska is 6 times worse. Now, there are a couple of possible explanations for why Nebraska is such an extreme outlier. One is that Nebraska really is a cesspool of depravity, unlike almost any other in America, and there really is 6 times more child abuse here than in Illinois. But the more likely explanation is that a culture of family destruction has come to pervade Nebraska child welfare. You see it when a police chief and a former head of the child welfare agency trivialize the heart-rending problems of safe haven families, declaring that they just want to press the easy button. You see it when Todd Landry, who I understand is now Texas's problem, makes a sick joke about safe haven and Nebraska tourism. You see it when a judge whose cluelessness is mind-boggling orders 7 safe haven children removed from their aunt because before she took in all those children, she didn't buy them each their own bed. You see it when another judge who, by his own description, has been known to take his cues for behavior from the bench from Judge Judy, tells off a parent in front of his child, either unaware or not much caring how that is likely to affect the child. You see it when still another judge does him one worse, and with no apparent understanding of depression, when he sees it right under his nose, bawls out a 12-year-old child. And you see it when a family argument by the side of the road turns into a month-long nightmare for the children of a California family who wound up trapped in Nebraska foster care. Now, of course, there's an all-purpose excuse for massive rates of child removal in all of the states plagued with this problem. Sure, adults may suffer when their children are needlessly taken away, but it is claimed we have to, quote, err on the side of the child. In fact, there probably is no phrase in the child welfare lexicon that has done more harm to children than err on the side of the child. When a child is needlessly thrown into foster care, he loses not only mom and dad, but often brothers, sisters, aunts, uncles, grandparents, teachers, friends, and classmates. For a young enough child, it is an experience akin to a kidnapping. Other children feel they must have done something terribly wrong, and now they are being punished. One study of foster care alumni found they had twice the rate of post-traumatic stress disorder of Gulf War veterans, and only 20% could be said to be doing well. How can throwing children into a system that churns out walking wounded 4 times out of 5 be erring on the side of the child? A second study of 15,000 cases is even more devastating. That study found that even maltreated children left in their own homes with little or no help fared better on average than comparably maltreated children placed in foster care. Once you understand who really is in the system, how often it is children like Sierra Moten, or children like the Safe Haven children, or children in those in-between cases, those outcomes are not surprising at all. All that harm can occur even when the foster home is a good one. The majority are. But the rate of abuse in foster care is far higher than generally realized and far higher than in the general population. That same alumni study found that 1/3 of foster children said they'd been abused by a foster parent or another adult in a foster home. The study didn't even ask about one of the most common forms of abuse in foster care, foster children abusing each other. Switching to orphanages won't help. The record of institutions is even worse. Furthermore, the more a foster care system is overwhelmed with children who don't need to be there, the less safe it becomes as agencies are tempted to overcrowd foster homes and lower standards for foster parents. If a child is taken from a perfectly safe home only to be beaten, raped, or killed in foster care, how is that erring on the side of the child? But even that isn't the worst of it. Everyone knows how badly caseworkers are overwhelmed. They often make bad decisions in both directions, leaving some children in dangerous homes, even as more children are taken from homes that are safe or could be made safe with the right kinds of help. The more that workers are overwhelmed with children who don't need to be in foster care, the less time they have to find children in real danger. So they make even more mistakes in both directions, and that's almost always the real reason for the horror story cases that make headlines. None of this means no child ever should be taken from her or his parents. Rather, it means that foster care is an extremely toxic intervention that must be used sparingly and in small doses. But for decades, the Nebraska child welfare system has prescribed megadoses of foster care. And if the waste of lives isn't enough, consider the waste of money. When it comes to child welfare, Nebraska is actually among the last of the big-time spenders. When you compare spending the same way we compared entries into care, Nebraska spends proportionately more than all but 12 other states. Nebraska spends at a rate more than 60% above the national average. Nebraska does have the money, right here, right now. Nebraska is just throwing it away on needless foster care and needless institutionalization. So what can we do about this? There are 2 publications on our website that are filled with recommendations. One is called 12 Ways to Do Child Welfare Right, which was created, by the way, actually at the suggestion of Diane Redleaf when she was on our board. The other is our due process agenda, called Civil Liberties Without Exception. But there is something that has to happen first, and it has to start among all the victims of needless removal of their children right here in this room and throughout the state. We've got to take the advice of Benjamin Franklin, who famously said, "We must all hang together, or surely we will all hang separately." It's human nature to try to find someone to whom we can feel superior, and it's human nature not to want to be lumped in with those who are stigmatized or stereotyped. Well, lousy child welfare systems thrive on that mistake. Nothing is better for them than dividing you up to conquer you all. I mention this because the most distressing single quote I've read during the entire safe haven debacle didn't even come from Todd Landry. It doesn't surprise me that when Gary Staton, the father of 10 who'd been portrayed sympathetically in early media accounts, fathered another child, he became the victim of a journalistic mugging on the front page of the World Herald. Hell hath no fury like a newspaper that thinks it's been suckered, even when it actually suckered itself by building a narrative about a troubled man to which that man couldn't quite live up. But it was crushing to me to read a few weeks later that another safe haven parent had turned on Mr. Staton. The rest of us are good safe haven parents, she suggested, while Staton is a bad safe haven parent. Don't lump me in with him. Well, I am lumping this mother in with Mr. Staton. I'm lumping them together in a great big group known as fallible human beings who don't always make the right decisions when under incredible stress. And since I've never had to endure anything like the stress of a safe haven family or an overwhelmed, impoverished single mother like Michelle Moten, I'm not about to claim exemption from that group, and I don't think anybody else should either. The people with real power in this state aren't drawing distinctions among you. That police chief said that all the safe haven families just wanted to push the easy button. Todd Landry held you all in contempt. So why in the world would you take the energy that should be spent fighting back and divert it into fighting each other? And I don't just mean all the safe haven families need to stick together. If you want to defeat the culture of family destruction in this state, then we need to hang together with the Gary Statons of this world. We need to hang together with the Michelle Motens of this world. We need to hang together with all the mothers and fathers in all those in-between cases. Ben Franklin knew exactly what would happen if we don't. Thank you very much.